Did you know that you can actually set your Apple Pencil Pro's squeeze function to trigger a Siri shortcut? For example, in mine, I've set it to trigger ChatGPT's voice assistant. What do you think of the brand new M4 iPad Pro?
The new M4 iPad Pro seems like a solid upgrade. How do you find it in your daily use?
So it seems like ChatGPT is asking the right question, but I want to start off this video by being completely transparent, because this video of the M4 iPad Pro that I'm making is going to be focused mainly around the hardware and not particularly the software. The reason I'm doing this is that in just under a month at Apple's WWDC Worldwide Developers Conference, where they're going to be announcing all the new software for all of their hardware lineup, Apple's expected to give iPadOS a major overhaul. Because as of right now, the iPadOS experience running on this M4 iPad Pro is basically the same as the iPadOS experience on like an M1 iPad Pro or even the outgoing M2 iPad Pro as well. So basically what I'm saying is don't buy the M4 iPad Pro, at least right now, for the software experience alone, because that is very much subject to change. But the hardware, my God, it is actually freaking fantastic. I think this is the best hardware Apple has ever shipped with any device they've ever made. So the first thing anyone who's going to pick up this iPad Pro is going to notice is how freaking thin and light it is. Like, it's just over 5mm thin. I don't even think the camera is picking this up because I don't think it's actually focusing on the edge of the iPad. That's how thin it is. And it weighs just over 600 grams, and that actually makes this 13-inch variant of the iPad Pro somewhat manageable with one-handed use. That's something I would have never said with the previous iPad Pro, but with this one, it's actually not just usable, but actually very comfortable to hold with one hand. Now, Apple claims that this thinner design for the iPad Pro is actually 20% more rigid than the previous generation iPad Pro, which was a lot thicker. And I can kind of see how they're coming to that conclusion, because despite how thin it is, it feels very dense and actually quite high quality. Now, I'm not going to go testing that claim because I'm not about to bend this iPad in half, but if you want to see that happen, I guess subscribe to Jerry Rig Everything. And while we're still on the back of the iPad, Apple actually removed the ultra-wide camera and instead put the LiDAR scanner where the ultra-wide camera used to be, and now we have this new True Tone flash along with the ambient light sensor on the back and the microphone on the back as well. Now, am I a fan of Apple removing features from their flagship products? Not entirely. But at the same time, the ultra-wide camera that came on this device with its previous generations were kind of crap to begin with. And no one under the age of 80 is using an iPad for like any creative photography or videography purposes. So it's not like you're losing out on much, but it is a loss nonetheless. All right, so let's touch on thermals a little bit, because on this new iPad Pro, Apple's actually including a more enhanced thermal architecture by including a graphite layer that actually helps disperse heat throughout the back of the iPad, along with some copper underneath the Apple logo for the same exact effect. So the M4 chip, which for the first time is debuting on this iPad Pro, is running a 10-core CPU, a 10-core GPU, and an updated neural engine, which Apple is saying will help accelerate AI-driven tasks. But when it comes to raw balls-to-the-walls performance, the M4 chip in this super thin iPad Pro absolutely freaking rips. So I ran a Geekbench CPU test on the iPad Pro, and yes, boo-hoo, benchmarks, not real-world performance, blah, blah, blah. I get it, but this is like the only way I can actually like show you the progression of performance. And the M4 chip, it demolishes every other Apple Silicon chip, at least the base level M series chips. And it even gets close to the M3 Pro chip in that you can find in like a MacBook Pro, or even the M2 Max chip that shipped with the MacBook Pro from just a year and a half ago, which is actually insane. I also ran a 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme stress test as well, just to test out the CPU as well as the thermals. And as you can see, it absolutely ripped here as well. It actually maintained quite a steady level of performance after the first run, which I thought was quite interesting, which kind of shows that the thermal architecture in this iPad Pro is actually being put to work. Now, Apple is saying that the neural engine of the M4 iPad Pro is like one of the best you can find in any consumer device, but that's going to be an interesting comparison to make against the upcoming Snapdragon X Elite chips that you're going to find in Windows on ARM devices. But that's a comparison we're going to have to make in the future. But as of right now, technically speaking, the M4 chip does have the fastest NPU, or something along those lines. Something important to note, however, is that the 256GB and the 512GB variants of the M4 iPad Pro come with a binned version of the M4 chip with one fewer CPU core and 8GB of RAM versus 16 for the two higher configuration storage options. Alright, so moral of the story, the M4 iPad Pro with its super powerful M4 chip is super powerful. Yay, woohoo, Apple, you did it again. But you've been doing that for the past 3 years with the M1 iPad Pro, the M2 iPad Pro, and now the M4 iPad Pro, but the software capabilities have been getting better slowly but surely, but not at the same rate as the exponential progression of the hardware on the iPad Pro. Now, my mentioning of iPadOS throughout this video is kind of like beating a dead horse, because let's face it, iPadOS is getting an update in just under a month, blah, blah, blah. But the fact of the matter is, the M4 chip, while there are some apps that utilize the full power of the chip, most people, you and me included, most probably won't actually notice any of these changes, because the things that we use the iPad Pro for, general productivity, maybe some creative tasks, are not going to feel that much faster on this compared to the previous generation iPad Pro. Moving on from that, now for a reason to actually get the iPad, and that is this brand new tandem OLED display. And this thing is the best display I've ever seen on any tablet or basically any consumer electronics device. So Apple's actually using two OLED displays stacked on top of each other, hence the name Tandem OLED, to achieve these high levels of brightness with the low risks of burn-in. And with this display on the iPad Pro, we can actually reach 1600 nits at peak HDR brightness or 1000 nits of sustained brightness for HDR content, which for a massive OLED display of this size is actually quite commendable. This OLED technology on the iPad Pro not only does allow for the iPad to be extremely thin, but it also allows for the iPad to have incredible contrast levels, because when it's displaying a black image, it's actually turning the individual pixels off because OLED pixels are self-lit. And without the new display engine in the M4 chip, this tandem OLED display wouldn't really even be possible, because running two displays like this is quite computationally intensive and requires a lot of efficiency on the back end. Now, before I round out the video, I want to mention the accessories you can get for the iPad Pro, including the Apple Pencil Pro, as well as the new Magic Keyboard for the M4 iPad Pro. Now, just like previous generations of the iPad Pro, the Apple Pencil Pro just snaps on magnetically to the side of the iPad, but this time you can't actually use any previous version of the Apple Pencil with this iPad Pro, only the Apple Pencil Pro and the Apple Pencil USB-C. This is because the front-facing camera array as well as the Face ID sensors have been moved to the landscape orientation of the iPad, which is definitely a good thing, but this means that Apple had to completely re-engineer the charging and pairing mechanism for the Apple Pencil to the iPad Pro because of where the actual mechanism is located on the side of the iPad. And look, that is kind of a bummer, because if you already have an Apple Pencil 2 and you want to use it with your upcoming M4 iPad Pro, you just can't do that. But at the same time, the new Apple Pencil Pro with all of its new features is actually the same price as the Apple Pencil 2, which I guess is some kind of solace, but at the end of the day, it is kind of net negative because you do have to buy a new pencil to use it with the new iPad. But the new features of the Apple Pencil Pro, they're pretty good. You have a new squeeze option, which I showed at the beginning of this video, which you can use to like bring up a quick menu, or in my case, use a Siri shortcut with. You can also double tap the side of the pencil and actually feel haptic vibrations in the pencil itself to know that you've changed your utensil, and that works with the squeeze functionality as well. There's Find My integration with proximity-based Find My, so you can find your pencil if you lose it. And there's also this new barrel roll kind of movement which you can do with the pencil, which basically like uses a gyroscope in the pencil to understand how you're moving the pencil and to apply different effects on whatever program you're using. It's actually like a pretty substantial upgrade. Oh, and I almost forgot, you can actually get a matte display option for the iPad Pro, which I wouldn't recommend for most people since it does kind of cut down on your contrast, which is the whole point of getting an OLED display in the first place. But if you're in a lighting environment which isn't very like controlled and you want to get the most glare-free experience, or if you're an artist and you like that pencil and paper feel with your iPad, which you can actually get with the anti-glare coating, the, what's Apple calling it, the nano texture glass option with the iPad, that is actually like a pretty good option to have. But at the same time, you can only get the nano texture option with the iPad if you opt for the 1TB model, which is a pretty fair sum of money. And you can get a similar effect of like the pencil and paper effect if you get something like a Paperlike screen protector, so there is that to consider. But if you're already getting a 1TB iPad and you're a digital artist and you like the pencil and paper feel, the nano texture option is something that you might want to consider. Now, this new Magic Keyboard, this is actually like really freaking fantastic. So this new Magic Keyboard, which is only compatible with the brand new 11-inch or 13-inch M4 iPad Pro, is the same price as the previous generation Magic Keyboard, which means it's, I think in my opinion, still a tad overpriced, but you get a bunch of new upgrades with this new keyboard. So first of all, this entire top casing portion of the keyboard case itself is made of aluminium, so it's actually really nice to the touch. The keyboard itself seems to have the same mechanism, but because of the actual material choice itself, the bottoming out actually feels much more satisfying, which I think is a positive overall. And for the first time ever for a Magic Keyboard in the iPad, you get a function row of keys, which is something that everyone's been asking for literally since the very first Magic Keyboard for the iPad. So that means you can perform core system functions without actually going to the control center and just doing it from the keyboard itself, which is extremely convenient. And this new trackpad, while also being larger, actually has a glass tracking surface, which feels really nice. It's basically like a Mac, which Apple said in the event, which I thought was kind of funny. But also it's using a haptic touch mechanism as well, which means that when you click, it's actually not a real click, but it's simulating a click through a haptic feedback mechanism, which feels really nice. It's basically just like a MacBook. At the end of the day, the hardware packaging for the M4 iPad Pro is probably the best you're going to see on the market in terms of both a tablet and a two-in-one form factor, but the software is where we're going to have to wait and see. So I guess like, subscribe, and follow for more content on my TikTok and Instagram as well, because I'm not done with this iPad Pro, definitely not, because WWDC is coming up and Tim Cook, he's definitely cooking something up very, very good. I hope.